Hello, Internet. Welcome to our Roll for Healing panel for PAX Online. My name is Elizabeth Kilmer. I am a clinical psychologist and a therapeutic game master. I work with Game to Grow. I am the director of education and training, and we are really excited to talk today on this panel with a bunch of other therapeutic dungeon masters. So I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and then we will get started.
That sounds great. My name is Adam Davis. I'm a founder and executive director of Game to Grow. I've been using Dungeons & Dragons and other role-playing games and therapeutic social skills work for almost 10 years. Before Game to Grow, I worked for an organization called Wheelhouse Workshop, and before that was working in other community agencies. I've also worked as a classroom teacher. My master's is in education with a specialization in drama therapy, so I use a lot of dynamic role play in my work.
Hi everyone, my name is Bhavika Parmar. I'm a national certified counselor and I'm a licensed professional counselor intern supervised by Beth Coles. I currently work at a private practice called Uplift Counseling Services in Allen, Texas. And I also work for a nonprofit called Chetna. And I've been facilitating Dungeons & Dragons in therapy with kiddos for a little over a year now.
Hey, I'm Heather Whittle. I'm a clinical psychologist from Boulder, Colorado, where I have a private practice called Boulder Valley Psychotherapy. And I primarily work with neurodiverse clients, and I've been using Dungeons & Dragons in groups or for therapy for a little over a year.
Hi, my name's Chris Spillman. I'm based in Denver, Colorado. By profession, I am a high school, middle school science teacher, but I'm also a social skills games master. I've been doing that for about 3 years through some therapy centers, and most recently I have joined the Game to Grow team.
Hi everybody, I'm Julia Stamen, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in Austin, Texas. I have a private practice called Heart of the Realm. I see adults who identify as geeks, gamers, and misfits. So I see individuals, and I also run D&D therapy groups for adults.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to have y'all. So my first question is for everybody. How did you get your start using tabletop role-playing games therapeutically?
Mine was by accident. It was not at all on purpose. I was in graduate school studying drama therapy, and I was doing a lot of freelance drama work, running active play groups with kids. And then I was looking for internship hours like we do in grad school and trying to get more experience because I knew that I wanted to work with kids at some point. And I had a lot of experience in drama, but I didn't have as much experience yet working with sensitive populations. So I wanted to get some opportunity to work with a different dynamic. And so I was looking for opportunities to volunteer, and then got a gig working at an after-school program where they were using Dungeons & Dragons as sort of a drop-in for kind of misfit kids to have some supervision doing something they enjoy doing, and then realized that as I was studying drama therapy, and drama therapy is, systematic and intentional role play for insight, growth, and change, I realized that Dungeons & Dragons is role play that I could use for insight, growth, and change. And then as I became a game master, I started playing with some of the concepts that I was learning in drama therapy, and then realized that just like sparks just started to explode about how useful this was and how accessible it was to maybe a population that wouldn't want to do drama therapy, wouldn't want to do even sit-down talk therapy, but were really engaged and excited about participating in Dungeons & Dragons.
Mine was not so random. My wife has been involved with Game to Grow for a number of years. They've written a Kickstarter product together called Critical Core. And so I've experienced my wife's enthusiasm for this for a number of years. But I only started doing this when I first moved to America about 3 years ago. My son was having a bit of a tricky time making friends in school. So I contacted his elementary teacher and said, hey, can I run an after-school club using D&D and there's another product called No Thank You Evil. It was kind of a combination of those, with the aim of having a social space where kids that were having a tricky time making friends, connecting with people, had the opportunity to do that. From there, it grew into running some summer camps for the therapy centers. Then when COVID hit, I've kind of been doing this non-stop for the past 8-9 months, whatever it's been. So there you go. It's been a nice journey for me.
Mine was sort of a bunch of like things happen all at once. You know how sometimes it's like that happens, but my next door neighbor wanted to learn how to play. My sister wanted to have a group. We started doing that. And I was listening to some clients, you know, in therapy talk about how they were doing D&D themselves just for fun, and but really thinking about how great it was for them and what they were getting out of it, and how this really should be like a therapeutic thing. And I started looking around throughout Colorado trying to find somebody who was doing D&D groups in a therapy setting. I thought I found somebody. It turned out to be Adam and Adam, so they were not in Colorado. So since I couldn't find anybody, I decided I would just have to try it. So last summer, I just did an experiment and started groups, and it's been awesome, so I keep doing them.
I have a really similar story to you, actually, where I actually started with my supervisor when I was an intern. I was kind of looking at where I wanted to focus my clinical specialization on. And we kind of discovered together, like, well, why don't you just like focus on the population that like you're a part of? And I was like, you can do that. Like, you can just like focus on geeks and gamers and misfits, like creative types, and like that's a thing. It doesn't have to be like anxiety or something like that. And she was like, yeah. So she was a huge supporter in being able to develop that. And I started out with individual clients who were bringing their casual characters into our sessions and talking about the group dynamics that were happening in their D&D games. And so I started looking it up, and I also found Adam and Adam. So it's kind of weird to be doing a panel with him and you all. It's really cool. I'm learning out. So yeah, I started researching, and I researched hard, and it's a pretty new journey for me as well.
So I started, my first experience with tabletop role-playing was when I was an intern at the Dallas Children's Advocate Center. That's where I met Elizabeth, and she actually brought this modality into the Advocate Center. So I remember venturing out, and then she, you know, taught me how to play, and we kind of got together and just started to play, and I got so much insight out of it. I was like, okay, I'm convinced this is something I want to try out. And then we kind of transitioned from there. But my first experience was actually because of Elizabeth. She's the one who introduced it to me, and I'm very grateful.
It was a lot of fun. Bhavika played an NPC, which was something that we did in the group, both to like have someone else in the group. But when you have like 6 or 7 players around the table, combat can get really, really squishy. And so her character had narcolepsy and would just like fall asleep. It was amazing. She did an awesome job.
You're the narcoleptic.
Yes,
I've heard this
she's the narcoleptic that I talk about every time I talk about having multiple facilitators in a group.
So many stories about this narcoleptic co-facilitator. That's great.
Yeah, you're a narcoleptic character. You were like a turtle character too.
I was, yes. You have a good memory.
It was super fun. It was the first time I had like gotten to help train someone else in this modality, so it was exciting. It was a fun group.
Yeah.
Okay. So my next question is, I'm sure a lot of the people that are coming to this panel have a general idea of like, how is this therapeutic? How is it going to be helpful? What are the kinds of things that you're seeing in your group, the kinds of growth and change? And that can be just a laundry list of skills, or if you have stories, because stories are interesting. Like what is it about this that makes it work?
I don't want to always be the one to answer first, but I feel like so a lot of the population that we work with at Game to Grow, so we have our population ranges from age 8 to early 20s generally. We're about to open some additional adult groups, but for the most part, our services tend to cover youth, adolescents, and emerging adulthood. A lot of whom have some degree of social setback, and we are sort of diagnosis agnostic, but a lot of our participants come to us with social challenges, sometimes related to mental health and sometimes not. But one of the most consistent things across all of our groups is some degree of social isolation and loneliness. And I would say one of the things that is so immensely profound about the work that we're doing with these young people is that they finally have a community, and they finally have a group that they can show up to once a week and feel like not only they can contribute to it, but their presence actually matters. And they are appreciated for the unique perspectives that they bring and the unique experiences that they have, which a lot of our participants are told throughout their lives by teachers or parents or community members that there's something wrong with them, that there's something wrong with the way that they interact with the world and behave and participate. And so finally, there's a place where people can show up and be celebrated for who they are and the perspectives and the uniqueness that they have. And one of the I get emotional even thinking about these sort of stories, but I've had so many stories where participants who are socially isolated and sometimes have never really had a friend before or been to a birthday party or anything like that. I had a group that group of adolescent boys, and at the end of the spring when we're transitioning into the summer where we were taking a break to have different kinds of programming, these adolescent boys stood up from the table and kind of paused before leaving to go be picked up by their parents, and they kind of looked at each other, and then they were silent for a little bit, and then they said, I'm going to miss you. I don't know what I'm going to do. This is what I've been doing for every week. And then they kind of gave each other a hug for these adolescent boys to do that. I mean, that's a huge thing for them to do this. And those are the kinds of small moments, these kinds of fugitive moments amidst the just intense amount of invalidation that they're getting on a daily life as part of their daily experience, either being in other forms of therapy that have been a little bit dehumanizing. So this is an opportunity for them to really make a friend and build a community.
Yeah, I'd really echo that. I mean, it is fantastic for that. It's also a great place to practice skills. And so I've worked a lot with kids or teens who have autism diagnoses or who have ADHD, and being able to have a place where they're motivated to take somebody else's perspective, being an advocate for themselves when they need to kind of put themselves out there and say, this is what I want, or whatever it might be. There's one story, I've got a great situation that happened about 5 weeks ago, I think, where two members were practicing having a conflict with each other. One member really wanted to chop everybody's head off, not within the party, but to chop off the heads of everyone that was in their way in the town. The other member, they were deep down underground, and they'd never come across the surface before. They didn't even believe in the surface. And this other member of the party really wanted to introduce these people to the fact that the surface exists. The sun is real, birds are real. And was very excited about this and had spent a long time convincing these people to come with them. And these characters were then watching other members of their town have their heads chopped off. And so they clearly didn't feel very comfortable anymore, following this party around. And so the two players had totally different goals. One just wanted to collect severed heads, and the other one wanted to introduce the players to the surface. And so creating the space for these two players to work out conflict. And at one point, one player, the one that was trying to guide them up to the surface, even said, "Can I attack my party member?" So I had to put some boundaries around that and say, no, you can't harm each other, but I wonder if there's some way of you guys working this out. And it was through hearing that this other party member was so upset with him that he actually wanted to attack him, that this kid who had an autism diagnosis really managed to take the other person's perspective and say, hold on, I'm ruining his plan, and I'm ruining his fun through doing this. Maybe I should change my plan. I'm going to chop off one more head, but then after that, I'll help him to get these people up to the surface, and this little conflict resolution that was happening as well. So it's a great place to have skills being practiced, social skills being practiced in a way where they're intrinsically motivated to do it, not being told, here's a fake scenario, you have to now work out how to solve these issues. So it's great for that.
So it sounds like you weren't saying like, hey, you can't do this, this is how you have to solve this problem, or you just have to get along, or you just have to compromise. But the
absolutely
collaboration and the decision making was happening as part of the
throwing
game.
it back to them. Yeah, throwing it back to them and letting them see, do you want to keep on chopping people's heads off or not? You've got the freedom to do that if you want to. If you don't want to solve this conflict, I'm leaving it in your court. Fortunately, it worked out. If it hadn't, I would have had to have taken some other strategies. But that was a great time where giving it to them to sort out, it worked out well.
I think there's this layer of like emotional safety that comes with the game that I find is really powerful, right? Whether it's like, okay, I'm gonna pretend to be this other person for a period of time, which means I can experiment with different ways of being that maybe I'm not that comfortable with, or maybe I've wanted to try out, but I feel like I can't. But even between the players and the NPCs too, I feel like this happens. Like I've experimented with using some sort of non-traditional villains where, the villain is an NPC who's having a social issue and they're handling it badly. Like they've been ostracized from the group, and so they're making zombies to go attack the rest of the group in the town because they feel left out. And having players come in and watching them go, yeah, that's not really a great way to handle it, and that they talk the NPC through how they could do it differently, and then watching the group talk about that for themselves in addition, I think has been really interesting to see them integrate their real life and their pretend life.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're pulling in some ideas around like the psychology of learning in terms of like, if this is a skill that we want you to learn, one of the most effective ways for you to learn that skill is to teach it to somebody else. And teaching it in this kind of low risk situation, teaching it to an imaginary villain, is very different than teaching it to a real world peer.
Yes.
That's awesome.
I think for me, one of the things I've noticed with the kiddos I worked with at the private practice, it was mostly working on skills building, but all of them pretty much, it was a range from, the kiddos were ranging from 8 years old to, I think the oldest was 16. So it was a good range. And all of them pretty much struggle with social anxiety. So for them to be in this group setting was a very big deal. And one of the highlight moments was probably like the second or third session. The youngest kiddo in the group, she was very, very quiet, extremely quiet. She was just observing everybody. And there was this moment where all the other kiddos were just fixated on one side of the map, where they're trying to figure out which direction to go in and trying to figure out if there's any traps or anything. And then she decided to speak up, and everyone just like looked at her. And one of the other kiddos was like, okay, she has something to say. Let's pay attention to her because she hasn't been saying anything. And just that interaction, there was a switch that happened there. And for them to hear her out and for her to even, put forth her suggestions and back that up with information saying, if we take this route, there might be less traps because of this, this, and this. And then I remember one of the older kiddos decided to praise her for speaking up and saying like, that's a great idea. Moving forward, her confidence just like was shining throughout the whole gameplay. Seeing that switch over and seeing that support was a very big deal. considering that they were all struggling with social anxiety. So I think having this safe place and knowing that there is going to be not only support from the facilitator, but from the peers that are within the group, I think that was a really big deal. So communication strategies, problem solving, that teamwork was very essential.
Absolutely. Those are awesome stories. And I love how much of a connect there is from like, this is what was happening in the game to then this is what was happening in real life, right? We see this translation of skills. We see this translation of experiences. I felt really supported in the game, and it gave me this extra confidence in real life. That's really awesome. One of the questions we get a lot is, what system do you use? Is there a magical system that makes the therapy better? Like, so can y'all speak to that? What system do you use? Do you think that that's the right system? Are there other correct systems?
I'm not going to answer first this time.
I will. I use D&D 5e mostly. I have used No Thank You Evil, but honestly, it's not being constrained to the rules of the system that you're using. So while I say I use mostly D&D 5e, really it's a homebrew version of that, where I make up rules to fit the whatever the needs of the group are in this moment. So that's me.
Pretty similar. I use D&D 5e and the rules for sure have a different alignment system, but I understand when people are like no to D&D and try a different tabletop roleplay game. I totally understand that, and I also think there's room to be flexible within D&D as well.
So it sounds like there's some flexibility. It looks like everybody around here uses D&D.
D&D is, 5th edition's a great game. Before 5th edition, we used 3.5. I've also used No Thank You Evil with younger kids, and we've experimented with other sorts of storytelling games. And we get this question, like you said, Elizabeth, a lot, and lots of consultations and lots of trainings. And the response that I always give people is the game doesn't matter as much as you matter. The secret ingredient is not, the rule books. The secret ingredient is you and your relationships with the participants in your groups. And so you can play Masks, you can play The Strange, you can play whatever indie games you really spark joy in you, because that is the thing you're going to be carrying with you in building the like authentic relational play that you bring to the table. If you're looking at the rule book and complaining about how much you don't like that game, you're not going to have a good time, and the participants aren't going to be having all the opportunities that they need to have that relational space that you are bringing. So if you have a game you love Pathfinder, play Pathfinder. It's not tied to 5th edition or anything like that. What is nice about 5th edition that I will say is that it's sort of in this sweet spot where the game is not so crunchy that you have to adhere to it all the time, and it gives you very clear opportunities to abandon rules. And Jeremy Crawford has told us several times in person of just abandon the rules that you don't like and add the new ones in, which I think is a great license that 5th edition provides. Every game has that. You can do that with any game, but 5th edition is what is so nice about it is that it's kind of baked in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He's talked about the rules as being like a scaffold. And if they're not working for you, then you can like pull out and rearrange pieces of that. Lego rules.
Yeah. Rules as written are raw, and you have to cook them and season them the way that you want.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. So thinking about like the rules that everybody around here is mostly using D&D, are there any facilitation strategies that you have found to be particularly helpful or particularly effective? That could be a rule that you change, a ritual that you use, something that you would be kind of willing to share or talk about, with the acknowledgement that we are not training anyone to be a therapist in this panel.
I was about to say, make sure that nobody goes home and tries to therapize.
Don't do this on your friends. Don't do it. So with that caveat.
I try using various methods of sort of reward or reinforcement for using a skill that's hard for somebody, or doing something that makes them nervous or scary, or inhibiting themselves if that's what they're needing. I've tried things like the golden dice. You get your like inspiration dice that's literally a gold dice if you are doing something helpful, or you have advantage on the next whatever. Or when I can, I try to make it so it's like the whole group benefits from a thing that somebody did, in whatever way that fits the story at the moment.
I like the story that Elizabeth, you and Bavika were together in the same group. One of the things I've found really helpful has been using other adults as well as part of the group. So the centre that I was doing this with would have an OT or an OT student with me in many of the groups, and using them as characters that can really be useful. They can take a role that's really useful for the group members. So I remember there was one group member that was really had no theory of mind, almost no, barely even registered that other people were in the room, but had their own narrative. And this is what I want to do in this session, and it's all about making spells that involve Disney characters, and this is what I see, and this is what I do. No real sense of going along with the story with the rest of the party, and using another adult in the room to be. She was the same race as her. She was the princess of her tribe, is the way that we made it, and she was helpless and useless. And I mean, she literally had to beg for help and come close to. She did a great acting job. Come close to tears as she was begging this other party member to help her and save her somehow, until eventually that teen kind of made eye contact with her and said, yes, okay, I do go over and stop this thing that I was attempting to do. I think she was attempting to climb up in a tree and get a magic carpet and fly around a bit, or some sort of off-the-wall idea, nothing to do with the combat that was happening at this moment. And using other adults in the room to take on a role that's going to help a player to take a next step forward in whatever they are working on with their skills.
It's an awesome story, Chris.
Me, I really believe in the power of the debrief afterwards. Like I said, I work with adults, so I've never run a group for kiddos, so I really just don't know that world. My adults are pretty, they're able to look at the connections between their characters and themselves and talk about what happened that game. And one of the kind of things that I like to throw in there right from character creation is to choose a trait that your character shares with you as a person, and then a trait that is totally the opposite of who you are, and just kind of mark those, and then we kind of come and check back in with what it's like to role play like that. So that's what I get a kick out of.
I think building on that. Oh, go ahead, Bavika.
Sorry. I found that, I did something really similar, doing a debrief at the end. I always like to prepare some questions ahead of time to ask the kiddos, and to see their relationship with their characters, and, then taking it back out, looking at it from a different perspective, in a sense, okay, this is what my character is doing, but okay, this is what I'm doing in real life, though. So being able to reflect and kind of look at things in a deeper context, and being able to talk about it in that open space with one another, and then also get feedback from the other peers. I found that to be such a big deal. I remember the kiddos were giving each other some suggestions, saying one of the topics that came up was bullying when we were doing debrief once, and they were making suggestions to one another like, hey, maybe if you did this or that, that could be helpful, or you can reach out to this person. So just giving one another suggestions, I thought that was really awesome. So yeah, that's something I can kind of relate to, that I found really was very impactful.
Building on some what Julia and I think Chris were both saying, is understanding more of the connection between a player has with their character, I think is one of the most important ways to sort of access the insight, growth, and change that we all know this game is so good at. Because, and we just talked about this in our training yesterday, and we're building it into our training program, but this understanding of what someone is putting into their character from themselves and what they're hoping to get out of being that character from themselves is really, really useful. And I encourage everyone who's watching to think about the characters that they have played over the course of their own D&D experience, because I'll bet you'll see through lines maybe in certain issues that your characters are trying to resolve, maybe some reflections of what's happening in your real life. Like if you were playing a character at a difficult time in your life, your character might have been really wanting to have power, really wanting to have dominion over the factors in their life because maybe you couldn't control the things in yours. And so understanding that and then letting that be an opportunity for the players to have some reflection about maybe the more problematic or maladaptive things they're doing, but also to build some of that confidence from their character. A lot of us play aspirational characters, and thinking about how to translate some of that confidence or some of those successes, because a lot of us work with people who are building skills, and in skill building you have to have practice, and you have to have practice to build confidence, and then carrying that confidence with you is the way to generalize that skill and use it in a real life situation. So understanding that is the most useful thing, I think, to generate skills and then translate them into real life.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those are. I love all these tips. I love moderating panels like this because I get to learn so many things and then steal it and take it and use it in my groups. Yes, do it.
And just say about the debrief. One of the things that Game to Grow has taught me is the power of the debrief by getting players to spotlight each other, and that opportunity to say, I really appreciated when you did this, and getting that positive peer feedback that we've already mentioned, working that into each session is fantastic as well. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think the debrief and something at the end to help the kids or whoever you're working with transition from the pretend place back to the real world, I've learned is really more important than I thought it was at the beginning. Like there's folks who have a hard time getting into the imaginary space, and then there's folks who get in easily but have a hard time coming out of it. So helping them transition back to their regular life and separate what's real and what's not real.
Absolutely, especially when we're trying to translate the skills and the experiences that happened in that kind of fantasy or roleplay place back into your real life.
Yeah.
So thinking about like that transitioning, and the fact that we've talked about how this is it's increasing in popularity as a treatment modality. Do y'all ever get any pushback from kids, from adult clients, from parents, from administrators around like, what is this? Why are you playing games? This isn't real. Anything like that?
It's only happened twice in my 10 years of doing this. Have I gotten pushback, overt pushback? Most of it is because there's sort of a selection bias, and people who are not interested just aren't ever going to email me. So I don't have to deal with that much pushback. Very, very beginning of my career in this field, I gave a terrible presentation to a school principal. And I've made a lot of mistakes doing this so that I would be able to have a lot of lessons that I can share with other people. So if you out there across the world watching this need this advice, I'm going to tell you about a sort of a cautionary tale. Is a time that I was really excited because I knew Adam Johns and I knew about this amazing potential. We'd already been doing this for a little bit. And I went to a school to see if we could have them just include a reference point for this in their school newsletter. Maybe they would help get some services to their student body. And we gave a presentation to this PTA, including the principal and some staff. And he said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Thanks for your time. Just really, really dismissing us. And of course, I walked out of there with my tail between my legs. And then reflecting on that, the thing that I had sort of realized is that I wasn't talking about the benefits of the game. I wasn't talking about the actual benefits the students were going to have, and thus, obviously, the principal and the teachers are going to have in terms of their educational outcomes. I was thinking about this game is really fun, and it's set in a fantasy world, and there's dice, and there's swords and dragons, and they did not care about that at all. And the thing that I needed to do, and what I would encourage you to do if you're going to give a presentation like this, is talk about the actual outcomes that you're looking for in the participants themselves, and say this is going to reduce your office referrals, and this is going to improve your students' capacity to work in small groups, and they're going to have better educational and academic outcomes because their frustration tolerance was reduced enough that they'll be able to withstand a school day without having to go into the one-on-one room. And those are the kinds of things that I should have done instead of preaching about the beauty of a high fantasy setting with all the great stuff about Dungeons & Dragons.
So know your audience is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Know your audience.
Yes.
Anybody else ever gotten pushback?
Not for me.
That's
some of us had to make the
hear.
mistakes and pave this way.
That's
make all the
awesome.
mistakes first. The only other time I had pushback was from I was tabling at a homeschool convention, and had a religious family come up and tell me that they knew someone in the 80s who had been seduced by the dark side and had full-on Mises and Monsters, become a Satanist because of Dungeons and Dragons. And I was there sitting at the table with Adam Johns, and the lady said, and to be honest, I don't know you from Adam. And Adam and I were both wearing name tags, and we just kind of like pointed to our name tag and kind of looked at each other, and she goes, "Oh, you know what I mean," and then stormed off. That was the only time.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay. So not a ton of pushback. So know your audience, and you will not get a ton of pushback. Maybe everybody else in this panel has just done a better job of knowing their audience, Adam. You know.
Well, like I said, cautionary tale. I tell that story a lot. That's like an 8-year-old story now.
Adam has gone through this so that you don't have to. So it's a great story. I love it. So thinking about that, as we're thinking, go ahead.
I was thinking it's good that you had gone through that and that you kept going, because I mean, like I mentioned, I'm one of there's a school. I'm probably one of your pupils, right? Like, if you hadn't kept going, then you wouldn't have paved the way for the rest of us. So I'm just grateful for that story.
Thank you.
So with that, with knowing your audience, who are people who are appropriate for this group? So what are the kinds of, are there certain ages? Are there certain other demographic variables? Are there certain diagnoses? Do you have to care and love fantasy and be a huge geek and have read all of the books and have been playing D&D since you were 12 to be able to benefit from treatment like this?
Honestly, I think it's good for everybody. I mean, therapy is good for everybody, right? We've all got personal things that we work on, we can improve, or we can just understand ourselves better. So yeah. And then, whoever you're working with, I think getting to know their personal needs, and then you can find a way to work that into the game, and then grouping your people into different groups according to what is maybe a better fit for them. Like maybe this particular group is more of a social skill focus. Maybe this one is more of a, we've got some anxious folks who are all working on kind of coming out of their shell, and they need kind of a slow, safe space to do that. But shoot, I have a hard time thinking of anybody that it wouldn't be good for.
I would say I would totally agree with that. The only people that I would say that shouldn't be in it is somebody that can't agree to table norms. So if you agree, this is how we make this place a safe place. That's the only caveat. I've never had somebody that's nonverbal, but I have had somebody who spoke through their parent. So they were so painfully shy that this was over Zoom, they would whisper to their mum, and their mum would kind of either encourage them to whisper it into the camera, or would say it for them. So I'd be intrigued at how this works with a nonverbal person. I imagine it might be able to. Yeah.
I think it's important that if it's being used in a therapeutic context, or even in a non-therapeutic but enrichment context, that the person running the group doesn't operate outside of the scope of their competencies naturally. So there may be populations that we as individual practitioners might not be the best for. And I think that's more about a match than it is necessarily someone who's just categorically not appropriate for it. There may be degrees to which, safety precautions have to be set up appropriately if there is history of whatever the context might be that might be important to keep track of, suicidality or substance abuse or you name it. Those are all the kinds of things that they would just have to make sure that the person operating with that participant or those participants is able to set that context up appropriately and make sure that they're only working within the scope of their competency. And there's special precautions you would have to take if someone was, struggling to identify what was real and what was not real. If someone had a history of hallucinations or something like that, that might be tough. Especially if the practitioner is engaging in lots of, blending reality and fiction and sort of collapsing the character identity and player identity, then that player isn't properly debriefed. And in drama therapy, there's a whole process of de-rolling where you, Elizabeth, are no longer your character. You are now Elizabeth. So as you leave this room, you will leave as Elizabeth instead of as your character. There's a whole process that we would have to really make sure is very clear and very ritualized, and then have the appropriate amount of follow-up to make sure it's effective.
Well, y'all feel free to jump in with any other thoughts, but we've got a few minutes left. And so what I'd really like to do is kind of open this up a little bit to if there are any kind of favorite stories or experiences, or even stories of a really hard time. Because I think it is easy, especially we're on the internet. What is the internet known for? Really good things and really terrible things. But oftentimes we put all of the cool, exciting, fun things out on the internet. So I'm going to invite y'all to share any stories that are your favorites, or a time that maybe was really hard for you as a DM or made you kind of question or wonder. Maybe it was that conversation with that principal, Adam, that made you wonder whether or not this is something you wanted to keep doing.
The cautionary tales.
The cautionary tales and the shining triumphs. Any of those.
I'll go. I have one. So I haven't been doing this for so long. So when I transitioned from doing this, facilitating from a nonprofit to a private practice setting, it was really difficult. I was actually very nervous, and Elizabeth wasn't there, and I didn't have any co-facilitators, so I was venturing out on my own. So I really, took some time and explored more of the content related to D&D and just practice storytelling on my own. So I would say, for folks who are going to venture out and do this in a therapeutic setting, I think it's really important to, get comfortable with the material and give it a try. I just took the leap, and honestly, it was just a matter of just being present and knowing that, thinking back to what I was taught by Elizabeth and kind of finding the character within myself too, that was really important. So that's something I just wanted to share with you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we haven't talked a lot about kind of how to get started in this. And we'll talk about some resources at the very end, but I think that's a really good point. Switching settings can be really challenging when you have a very adaptable modality, but the setting you're moving to looks very, very different than the one you started in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine kind of goes along with that. I had the idea to run these groups for so long and was just putting off it out there, and I finally decided to really market. And I had my first group, and then COVID hit. So I wasn't able to transfer online with that group. And so I think a big part of it, my lesson to take away is just keep going, just keep persevering when, things don't go quite your way with the formation of the group even. It's a very niche thing. So finding people that are interested in that and that fits, aren't in active crisis, and can, all of the variables lining up when you're first getting started is it's a little bit challenging, so just keep going.
Yeah, I also had some issues with COVID. I had a group running, and transferring it from in person to online was a much rougher experience than I anticipated. It changed the dynamic a lot, and a lot differently than I thought it would. So that has been a rough summer. Coming back, trying to like figure out, okay, let's change this. How am I going to run it differently to make it better? But in terms of like favorite things, like just recently, with sort of a mini group, like a dyad that I'm doing, got a kiddo who is just, has always been really anxious and tries to engage by telling jokes and doing kind of like off the wall stuff and, see people's reactions and things. And, usually gets a response of like, no, stop that. That's not okay. Or not that joke, or right. But we're running the critical core beta testing for the Game to Go product, and he had this idea of like, right, I'm gonna like transfer this liquid from this place to this place by drinking it and then barfing it into this new cup. And I was like, that totally worked. And he was like, no, what? And I was like, yeah, that worked. He was like, no. Like he had to really like think and process it for a minute that like, okay, my off the wall idea that I totally just expected to make people laugh actually just solved our problem. And he was just like flabbergasted for a little bit. But then this sense of like different sort of perspective on himself and pride, I think, started to happen.
That is an awesome story. You can solve puzzles in really interesting and different ways in D&D. It's another plug for why you should play this game.
And it sounds like what you were doing there was also like relating authentically to him in a way where he was maybe even pushing boundaries to doing some boundary testing to say, I'm going to try to barf and see what she says. And then you're like, yeah, you barf and it totally works. And it's awesome, and you succeed, and your barfing is what made you successful. And then you can, have that authentic relational space with them. That's great. So that story that Heather just told reminds me of this other story. While we're thinking about advice for game masters, one of the best things I think that game masters can think of is being flexible and being prepared for whatever the players bring in. So not only like their creative ideas they bring in that make you have to be flexible as a game master, but also the kinds of things that they bring from their personal life that might surprise you and make you have to sort of switch how you're running the game. In one of the stories a few years ago at this point, but this is one of my favorite examples of this, is a story called The Age of Green that's actually going to be ending up inside one of the critical core modules. It's been modified a fair amount, but in the course of this adventure, the players have to go meet a Dracolich. This Dracolich is the last remaining Dracolich from these dragon wars between the dragons and the Dracoliches, and they have to get the Dracoliches help in fighting back the plants that are preparing to take over the entire world. And they go to this Dracolich's cave, and I set up this encounter such that they would talk to the Dracolich and have to convince him to help them, and maybe have to make a deal. Dracoliches are traditionally pretty evil, this one included, and it was going to be a values clarification encounter where they were going to have to figure out how to decide what their values were around saving the world versus working with someone who is objectively problematic. So in the course of this conversation, they went over there to talk to this Dracolich, and they said, the world is about to be consumed by plants, and we need your help. Otherwise, everyone who lives out there will be consumed, eaten by plants, or worse. And the Dracolich said, why should I help you? I'm the last of my kind. I have no friends, no family, and no kin. That's okay with me, that the world is destroyed. And one of the players surprised me. And after the Dracolich said that, he said, that sounds really lonely. It's kind of like me. I also don't have any friends, and I'm alone a lot too. And I was sort of taken aback by that as the Dracolich, and decided to shift the Dracolich in that moment from being this deal with the devil type of encounter to a sympathetic character that then they needed to help. And they decided to help the Dracolich make more Dracoliches. So they found a notorious dragon who had just laid a bunch of eggs, and they agreed that they were going to go to that dragon's nest and paint an ichor on top of those dragon eggs and then turn them into Dracolich babies so that the Dracolich could finally have friends and family again. And one of those players actually, at the end of the campaign, when they sort of retired their character, they became the Dracolich queen and helped raise the Dracoliches. And that moment was a moment of surprise because I had made all of the assumptions that I could about how the players were going to relate to this villain character. And then they brought in something different that was way more important and way more magical for me to play with than a bad guy. And I think that's one of the most useful things that we can do as game masters is be ready for anything.
I think for me, one of the most exciting things has been to watch my son develop over the years, giving him exposure to groups like these, involving him in groups like these, seeing his confidence increase, and seeing his ability to connect with people and to advocate for himself and to reach out and make relationships with others has just been amazing. One of the things I think you asked that was hard as a GM, I'm sorry, it's been, I was listening to Adam's story so intently that I've forgotten your question, but I'm going to say this anyway. One of the things that was hard for me as a DM has been to come up with creative storylines. I've been doing so many storylines recently that having to bounce that off somebody else, and that's where my son has been amazing as well. He's got such a creative mind. I just say to him, "Look, this is where my players are. What can I do?" And he's just got all of these crazy ideas of things that would be amusing or challenging that I can bring in. And so I think my lesson from that is having somebody to bounce ideas off, having somebody that you can speak to that can help you with whether it's the creative side of things or, I've asked Adam for help on how to respond to people type thing as well. If you've got somebody that you, as a team member, that you can brainstorm with about the kind of approaches that you might have to challenging behaviors or that sort of thing.
That's awesome. Thank you all for sharing so many amazing stories today. The last thing I want to do is, my guess is that after watching this panel, there are going to be a couple of people that are going to wonder where to find y'all. Either just to follow you on Twitter, because that's what people like to do apparently, or looking for services or looking for training. So I will go ahead and put in a plug for Game to Grow. Like I mentioned before, I'm the Director of Education and Training. We are rapidly expanding our training opportunities because this is a pre-recorded panel. It is a little ways away from me, but for y'all watching this panel, it's only a couple of days away. We will be launching our comprehensive training program, and the level 1 training is tentatively scheduled to take place on October 3rd. So you can check out our website at www.gametogrow.org to sign up for that. I'm so excited. It is a lot of years in the making. You can find me personally at Drs. Kilmer on Twitter. What about everybody else?
My personal Twitter is at Sparks for Sharks. But I suggest for more information about what we talked about today, you follow at Game to Grow. That's Game TO Grow. And if you want to know more information about the training program, certainly keep your eye out on our newsletter, which you can join at gametogrow.org/newsletter. Really recommend that because we have a lot of webinars that pop up on regular basis. So please keep your eye on that. If you want to know more about Critical Core, you can go to gametogrow.org/critical core, and you can still pre-order a copy of that through the backer kit. So I suggest you check that out. And I think that's the only other thing that I was supposed to mention. That sounds right.
So. Pavika, but what about you? Where can people find you?
So I don't have a Twitter. So
Fair.
The best way to reach me is via email. A good email address to reach me at is my first name, which is Bhavika, BHAVIKA, at uplift-counseling.com. And to inquire about services and to learn further about D&D that's happening in Allen.
Cool. Heather, what about you?
Yeah, I'm not super internet competent. I don't have a Twitter thing,
That's
but
super
you can
reasonable.
find my contact information. Try my website at bouldervalleypsychotherapy.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
I am not a Twitter person either. There is a handle, Mr. Spiely, but I don't think I've posted for several years. The best way to get me is through the Game to Grow team. I'm now a member of that family, which feels great.
Yes, we can absolutely connect the dots.
Yeah, I'm on the Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, that order, and it's always just at Julia Stamen.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Adam has another thing that he wants to say.
I remembered what I was going to say.
Excellent.
After I heard everybody else talk about it. The other thing I was going to say is that Game to Grow offers services online now.
Yes.
This
worldwide.
is super exciting. So if no matter where you are across all of PAX Online, you can contact us, join our waiting list, and there's a good chance we can get you or someone you know into a group. So make sure you go to gametogrow.org and learn more about that.
Yes, Game to Grow offers groups, individual counseling services, and training. All right. Well, thank you so much. Everybody say goodbye. Goodbye, Internet.
Thank you.
And